The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Jessica Kapkar. I'm the Communications Manager at the BBB serving Central Ohio. We're glad you could join us today, and we hope everybody is still staying safe and kind of adapting in these uncertain and weird times that we're living in. We're glad to have you here with our presenters today, and I wanted to let you know that we are recording this webinar, so it will be available after today on our trustlocal.org website. That is where we house all of the webinars that we've hosted throughout the past couple of months, so feel free to refer back to this as you feel necessary and take a look at any of the other webinars that might be helpful for you as well. This afternoon, we have with us Dan Orzano. He is the Manager of Outreach and Investor Education for the Division of Securities. Dan manages a statewide investment educational program focusing on reducing the rate of securities, financial, and investment fraud by informing and educating Ohioans about the best practices to manage their financial investments. He also manages all internal and external communications for the division, including media relations, social media, digital, and print content. As well as Dan, we have Victoria Yurkovic, who serves as the Consumer Affairs Manager for the Division of Financial Institutions, Office of Consumer Affairs, where she oversees the division's outreach efforts, which includes in-person events, social media, website, and media relations. Additionally, she manages the Consumer Complaint Program and the facilitation of financial literacy education to the citizens of Ohio. So we're thrilled to have them both with us today. I'm going to turn it over to Dan in just a minute. I wanted to let you know if you do have any questions, please feel free to type those into the question box, and we will definitely save time at the end to answer all of those. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let Dan take over.
Thank you, Jessica, and good afternoon to everybody. Special thanks to the Central Ohio Better Business Bureau for having us today. Victoria and I, as she mentioned, want to talk a little bit about some of the fraud that we're seeing, not just now with what's been going on with the pandemic, but especially on the investment side. These things apply pretty much year round. Sometimes it's just a new twist on the same thing. So in a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about that. What I wanted to share, first of all, is just a quick overview of the Department of Commerce, which Victoria and I are a part of. You can see on the screen, we have 7 divisions, some of which may look or sound familiar, or you may have interacted with them in the past. We already mentioned securities, financial institutions. We also have liquor control, real estate, and professional licensing. And we have the state fire marshal, industrial compliance, and one of the other things that's fairly recent, that's been active for about a year, is the medical marijuana control program. And so that's kind of a quick overview. And all of us pretty much are involved in trying to keep people safe, sound, and secure. So I want to talk a little bit about securities specifically. And as I said, what I cover is a little bit different from Victoria, because we're dealing specifically with issues around investing and in companies and organizations. So I'll talk a little bit about that here as we go along. But it's important to know, when we talk about securities, to know exactly what it is legally, and kind of a breakdown. Very simply, according to the Ohio law, is when a person gives something of value, usually that's money, to another person, and then you expect a return at some point. Some key things to remember, though, is the investor is considered to be passive. That is, they don't have control once the investment is made. You've provided that control to the person who's controlling the investment. You may have had some input on that, but they're making all the decisions as time goes on. So that's important to understand the difference there. And we're also not talking about just stocks and bonds. That's probably what most people think about. But there's also possibilities to invest in things like oil and gas drilling. A number of years ago, it was very popular in Ohio when they discovered shale down in the southeast portion of the state. A lot of people who had property, farms, and things like this didn't realize they were literally sitting over a gold mine, and they were leasing property or selling property making a lot of money. And part of what we saw there was organizations coming in and looking to package these as some kind of an investment. So, and we do still see that today. Promissory notes, that's a term maybe some of you have heard. It's basically a loan that you make to people and they promise to pay you back over a certain period of time. This is a lot of times to invest in a company of some kind. Real estate, a lot of people do invest in real estate. There's a lot of ways to do that. Again, packaging properties or packaging some kind of an investment around buying real estate or rehabbing real estate, what have you. So there's also a lot of other products, and we'll talk a little bit about how we look at that here in a little bit, but annuities, viaticals, ETFs, those are all other types of products that we do see quite a bit. So a little bit about what we do in terms of our responsibilities. I like to talk about the 4 Ps. The first P is people. We license those who sell investment products here in Ohio. So if you're an investment advisor, stockbroker, you do need to be licensed here, and there's also sometimes federal licenses that you have to fall under. The second P is products. So I talked a little bit earlier about the types of products we see. We have a section that deals with reviewing the product offerings, a lot of legal materials that they have to review, advertising materials, marketing materials. And what they're looking for is just to make sure that they're not making outrageous claims or there's something inherently misguided about the product. We want to make sure the language is clear. A little bit about the people in the backgrounds if there's any issues. So they review that quite a bit. And what we're talking about is specifically what we refer to as private placements. These are not typical stocks that you're going to see on the big board exchanges, but these are things that are being done in a little different way. A lot of times these could be banks and large investment firms that are participating in these types of products. The third one I refer to as the problem area. We have a team of attorneys on our enforcement side. These are the folks that do go after the bad actors. So we have a team of investigators who will take people's concerns or complaints if they think there's a possibility of being defrauded or they have been defrauded, and they determine whether it's a case that we can take, and they'll work with the team of attorneys and they will basically decide whether that's something they can deal with. And they have a lot of power in this side of the house. They can do civil injunctions, they can request records, and ultimately they can take these cases to court. And what we typically do is we'll put a package of information together with all the details. We'll work with county prosecutors, and the county prosecutor will decide, to take that to a grand jury, and the grand jury decides whether to take that case on and hold the person for trial. And then we can participate in the trial portion, providing evidence, testimony, that kind of thing. And so also, this is really the big part when we talk about dealing with fraud in Ohio is on the problem side. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. And finally, the fourth P is prevention, educating consumers. That's what I do. That's what we're doing right now. Typically, I'm on the road doing a lot of presentations to all types of organizations. We target senior groups specifically because they are very, very much targeted by scammers. Obviously, today we're doing this virtually, so I've kind of transitioned some of my presentations and looking for opportunities to spread the word and do the same kind of prevention, but do it via online system. So that's probably going to continue for a while. I want to talk briefly about some of the things we tell people to look for as far as the general red flags of fraud. And again, this applies to any kind of investment or activity that you may be considering, whether it's related to the pandemic or just in general. As I said before, it really doesn't matter that we're dealing with issues specifically to the coronavirus. I mean, it's kind of a different twist, as I said, on the same idea. So one of the things you really need to watch if you're working with somebody or approached by somebody to invest is look for unreasonable interest rates. right now, if you're in the market, obviously it's been going up and down. If you're getting 5, 6, 7, 8% or so, that's not too bad. Obviously, your bank accounts are getting, way less than that. But if someone says, hey, I can get you 30% return on your money, and if they also promise they can return it, very quickly, that's a red flag. You should be very careful about hearing things like that. The next one is a pressure to buy immediately. This is something where we see quite a bit. People, tell us, yeah, well, they told us, it was only good for today, or I had to make a decision, by tomorrow. Any legitimate investment, you should not have to buy immediately. You should be allowed to ask questions, do research, request information to read, get a second opinion. You should never have to buy anything immediately when it comes to a legitimate investment. Unexplained business practices, these are things like not getting information, not getting something from the person that says explains the product and what you're investing in. If they just tell you a bunch of stuff over the phone or an email, that's a red flag. And then the one big thing is there's sometimes we'll hear them say, well, there's absolutely no risk involved. It's absolutely guaranteed. That's a huge red flag. Any legitimate investment, there's some risk. If you do get into legitimate investments, if you read the prospectus, and sadly a lot of people don't, so I always encourage people to read it. It's a lot of fine print, but it's important. Somewhere in that fine print, it's probably going to say you could lose some or all of your investment. So again, if you hear there's no risk or it's guaranteed, that's a huge red flag. Here are the types. I want to talk about some of the types of fraud that we do see. And again, whether it's something related to the pandemic, like a cure or a treatment or a product of some kind to protect people. No matter what it is, the way that's done is, follows a fairly basic pattern. The first one is affinity fraud, and this is a fraud that involves a group of people. It could be a religious organization. Sadly, we see a lot of this happening in churches and synagogues. It could be a professional organization. If you're in a profession and you have a industry group, local chapter of some kind, you could be a professional group. This does happen. Social clubs, recreational clubs, we see this happen in gyms and basketball leagues and golf teams and bowling leagues and things like this. And then also, your neighbors or even your relatives could be involved in this. There's all just some different ways it could happen. But basically what happens is a person joins the group, and after a period of time, they become accepted, they become a trusted part of that group, and at some point they will approach the other members of the group and say, hey, I've got this great idea, I've got this wonderful product, I'm starting a new business. And because people have trusted this person now, they don't ask a lot of questions. They don't pay attention to the red flags of fraud, and they just invest without asking any questions. They don't know, again, this person's background, or if there's any problems, or if they've been scamming people before. So affinity fraud is a huge issue, and we do see that all the time. Boiler rooms. Now, you may have seen scenes in movies in a large room with lots of telephones and people talking and reading from scripts. This does happen. And, again, I talked earlier about being pressured. This is where it happens a lot. You get a cold call, you didn't initiate the call. The person's calling you out of the blue. Somehow they got your name and number, and they start telling you all kinds of information about a product or what have you. And they put a lot of pressure on you. Again, they want you to buy now. They want you to buy a lot of product. And a lot of times they really don't give you a lot of facts. And so there's a couple of scenes in The Wolf of Wall Street, if you've ever seen that movie, where these kind of tactics are used all the time. So you need to be careful, especially, again, if you're not initiating it, if they're calling you out of the blue. And that's true of anything, really. The third one is something most people have probably heard, and it's a Ponzi scheme. And a lot of these frauds happen as a Ponzi scheme. And again, they happen a lot of different ways, but essentially they all operate the same way. Charles Ponzi was a 1920s con artist. He promised high rates of return, and when people got money, they would ask him to roll that money over and reinvest it. He produced a lot of fake information and fake statements. That's how he got people. The Bernie Madoff, we see Ponzi schemes every day. They all operate the same way. Basically, person will ask a number of people to invest in something, and those people will invest, and then later on they'll continue to look for more investors. Those new investor monies then get put into the previous investors, and it kind of just continues in a big circle like that. The problem is eventually Ponzi schemes will collapse because you don't find new investors to pay the old investors, or everybody wants their money back at the same time, which is what happened in the Madoff case, and there's no money. It's either been spent or it's been paid out, or the person who's running the Ponzi, because of living lavish lifestyles, there's just no money. So Ponzi schemes are pretty typical. We do see that, again, every day, and it's a case that, sadly just doesn't go away. I talked a little bit before about how it works. People will pay, the early investors will join in. The money gets paid back to the early investors by the new investors. A lot of times it's word of mouth. Hey, I heard about this great thing. I'm invested. You should too. And as I said, it'll typically collapse. And sadly, in most cases that we deal with, people trying to get their money back, if they're lucky, you might get pennies on the dollar, but a lot of times when the money's gone, it's gone. So you really do have to be careful. One key thing about this is we found this happened in some cases, not in all cases, because every case is different, that, the early investors who may have gotten some money, sometimes the government will come back and they'll try to get that money to forfeit because it's considered ill-gotten gain. It's called a clawback. And so even if you think you did win, later on, you never know. That could, if it comes to be, you may lose your money anyway. So again, you just need to be very, very careful. So a couple things I always tell people before you invest, you need to consider several things. And some of these I've repeated or I talked about earlier before. The first one is the risk. What is the risk of the investment? Can I lose some or all of my money? And as I said earlier, every legitimate investment has a risk. So you need to be asking those questions. You need to read the fine print. It's just critical to know what you're getting into. Liquidity, a lot of people may invest and not know that they may not be able to have access to their money right away. Could be a period of time that has to pass before you're allowed to get it. If you need some cash, it may not be the right investment if you don't have access to it. There are other types of things you can put your money and have liquidity, but you need to know that. Suitability, that's really a key one. Everybody needs to have some kind of an overall investment goal. You need to have a plan, whether you're doing it with yourself or a person's helping you. You need to know if that product is going to help you accomplish that goal. Is it for retirement? Is it for the down payment on a house? What's it for? And so products might be legitimate, but that doesn't mean they're suitable for everybody. So it's important to know that. And these are questions you can also ask the person. How much money are you getting paid for my investment? If you're working with a professional, sometimes they make money on fees, a monthly fee or an annual fee for their services. Other times they may make a commission. And I think it's important to ask that question. There's nothing wrong with asking that question. If they're doing a good job, they deserve to get paid for it. But I think it's important to know how they are getting paid. This next one is really key. This is the one that we talk about quite a bit in what we deal with, and it's trust but verify. Again, as I said, we license people and we look at products, and so it's important to know, is that person licensed? And is the project registered? And again, is it on a state level or a federal level or both? If you're not sure, these are the kind of things we can look up for you. Here in a little bit, I'll provide an 800 number you can use and some other resources to check out the person. And it's important, again, back to the affinity fraud. Just because you know this person, you may trust them in your golf league, doesn't mean you should trust them with your money. So that's really, really critical. And lastly, understand the product. Just like I talked about suitability, is it right for you? You just also need to know what kind of a product. How's it work? What kind of a return can I get? How long is it going to take to get my money? Those kind of things. As I said, read the fine print, ask questions. It never hurts to ask a lot of questions, and don't invest until you really fully understand. And you can also look for third parties to help you. There may be other professionals, sometimes attorneys, CPAs, Obviously, there's a lot of online information. I would be careful with that in terms of looking at trusted sites. And again, I do have some resources here I'll show you in a little bit. But before you invest, you really need to know what it is you're getting into. So a little bit about what, again, we can do and what we do. As I said earlier, we can confirm the person selling the product, are they legitimate, are they licensed, and even if they are licensed, what's their background, what's their work history, do they have any complaints against them? We can look into that for you. And then again, the products, is it registered? Is there something about the product that you have questions about? I talked about the enforcement side. We can coordinate the investigation and pursue action if we think there's a fraud going on, and that could include, as I mentioned earlier, civil or criminal proceedings. We can take administrative actions to stop the fraud or stop the person from what they're doing. And so it's really important that if people think there's a problem and they suspect something, that they call us right away. Because as I was saying earlier, if you wait too long and the fraud continues, you may not get your money back. And so finally, I'll close out with basically saying the number one way to prevent fraud is to check before you invest. And something I use all the time in my presentations, which probably a lot of people have heard before, is it seems too good to be true. It probably is. So on your screen, there's some information there where you can look up the backgrounds of the person who's trying to sell you something, or if you have questions about the product. Our investor protection hotline, that 877-683-7841 number, you can call that. It's a voicemail system. You leave a message. I always tell people, make sure you leave a very complete message, your name, and also a callback number. Sometimes people forget to leave a phone number. We can call them back. And one of our folks will get back in touch with you. You can also go online to our website, which is listed there, and there is a form you can fill out. And you can either submit it or you can print it out and send it in. Two other sources I want to talk about real briefly. One is called Broker Check, and this is a site by FINRA, which is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. This is a group that we obviously do work with. Broker Check allows you to go in, you can put in the person's name, the name of the firm if there is one, and it should pull up information if they're licensed, or if maybe their license isn't active. And you can check them out and see all their history, see who they've worked for, see if they've had any problems, that kind of thing. Again, we can do the same, but that's a real quick way to do a first check. And the other site is investor.gov. This is a site by the Securities and Exchange Commission. They have a similar site to Broker Check where you can do a background check on the firm. But the other thing about investor.gov is there's a lot of really good information, whether you're new at investing or you have experience. There's a lot of great information and resources on that site. And I point people to that quite a bit if they have any specific questions, or to do some research, again, if you're trying to consider whether you should invest in something. So that's the end of my presentation. I appreciate the time, and we will hand it over to Victoria.
Thank you, Dan. Yes, Victoria, you should be able to share your screen anytime. And Dan, thanks again for that outstanding information.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about some common financial scams that's kind of related to the financial institutions world. A little bit will be COVID related, and then taking traditional scams that we've seen in the past that kind of rotate year after year, and seeing how they've transformed over the past 6 months since we've been in a worldwide pandemic. So before I get into that, I do want to briefly kind of talk about the different financial institutions that we do regulate. Dan briefly touched on it, but I just wanted to go in a little bit more depth. So he mentioned that we regulate and examine state chartered banks and credit unions. We also do regulate money transmitters. So that would be your Google Pays, your Venmo apps, Cash apps, anything that has to do with the transmission of money. We do have a non-depository section, which is our consumer finance entities. So we regulate and examine and license consumer finance products like short-term loans, general loans, mortgage lenders and brokers, pawn shops, precious metal dealers. And then within the division, we also have the Office of Consumer Affairs, which I am the manager of. The Office of Consumer Affairs, like mentioned earlier, just promotes the division's role in protecting Ohioans through education and outreach. So like Dan, I do go around and participate in community events, as well as provide educational materials and trainings and talk to consumers statewide. We also do have a consumer complaint program, and I'll actually give you that number towards the end, kind of talk to you how we address complaints that we see within our state. And then we also do have a financial literacy program that we administer funds to for organizations that want to provide greater outreach of financial literacy programming to any age group. So what I like to do in kind of working through the common trends of scams that we see, as well as how they've been transformed over the past six to 7 months with COVID, is really follow up with the Federal Trade Commission. They have a report that they update regularly on all of the complaints that they've received over the past 7 months to date, that shows a reflection of what people are reporting and how it's affected by the pandemic. So you can see from this map, these are the overall reports by type. Overall reports, they've had about 122,148 reports. And you'll see at the top left corner, they do break that down into categories. I'll kind of talk about the fraud categories, and then I'll kind of go into the other ones a little bit later. But with those reports, there's been about a total fraud loss of $78 million. So they're indicating that about half of the reports that come in has some type of financial loss. And the median fraud loss right now is about $269 per victim. So I actually did a presentation about 2-3 weeks ago, and that overall report was actually around the 105 mark, and so it has gone up in the last 2-3 weeks. However, the median fraud loss decreased. So we saw about 2 or 3 weeks ago it was at 280-ish, so it is a little bit less. So that's a good trend to see. The top reports that have been found are really your common 5 top fraud reports in general. Online shopping is a huge one. I'll kind of go into some safety tips as well as some scams that we usually see with online shopping a little bit later. And then followed up from online shopping, we see travel and vacations to be a top reported complaint, credit card fraud complaints, banks, saving loans, credit union complaints, so your account numbers and your accounts you have with those financial institutions, and then fraud reports dealing with text messaging. And then just to kind of give you an idea of when they say fraud, what they're really breaking it down to is about the top, these 10 common issues that are the category of fraud. So number one, they're really looking at imposter scams, which the elderly is a big victim of imposter scams, and I'll actually talk about that in a little bit. Also within their fraud category is your telephone mobile service fraud, online shopping fraud, internet service fraud, your prize, sweepstake, lottery scams, foreign money offers, counterfeit check scams, travel vacation scams, business opportunities, healthcare, and then advance payments for credit card. And then when we kind of look at identity theft, I'll kind of just break that down too. When someone complains about an identity theft scam or reports on it, they're looking at information that's stolen through a credit card. They do have an other category, loan or leasing fraud. So if somebody had their information stolen from trying to obtain a mortgage loan or some type of short-term loan, phone utility fraud, bank fraud. So their banking information was taken, employment or tax-related fraud, and then government document or benefit fraud. So that could be including Social Security. And then the other category is the categories you see right there, your credit bureau information, bank lenders, if their information is compromised and you were involved in data breach of some sort, in a fake debt collector. Maybe it's auto-related, your information was stolen, credit card information, and then you'll see television, education, home repair, computer, software equipment, and then funeral services. Of the total 122 reports that have come in, 63,000 of those are in the fraud category. And again, that's the total loss of the 78 million. Top fraud reports, I mentioned online shopping is your number one. However, I did want to bring this up because you'll notice that even though travel and vacation is ranked number 2, it does have the greater loss. And that's usually because your travel vacation packages are of greater value than sometimes your shopping sprees. So you'll notice a greater loss in that category than you would normally in your top ranked fraud report. So when the FTC also collects information, they're also looking at the contact method from the scammer, and they're looking at the payment method. So in this situation, you'll see in the last 7 months or so, websites have been the biggest target. Very closely after that is phone. So they're seeing the greatest fraud on websites, so whether that's fake websites or just people being able to get your information that you type into a website of some sort. Maybe it's not as secure as you thought it was, or people are getting duped over the phone. And a lot of times we always try to educate and try to explain, like, don't give personal information over the phone, don't give anything you wouldn't normally give, face to face. But people are caught off guard all the time. There was stimulus checks coming. There was people getting random phone calls from banks. There was, refinance phone calls. There's so much information, so many people trying to contact you at a time where you are most vulnerable. So it's not out of the ordinary that the phone method was kind of one of the top 2 methods of your fraud scams. Then there's email that closely follows your consumer initiated contact. So the consumer reached out to somebody they thought was a legitimate person, but it ended up being a scam. Your other category, and then mailers. And then with the payment method, the greatest loss is through credit cards, which is not uncommon. And then your bank account or your debit card is ranked secondly. Internet, mobile, so through your internet or mobile apps, wire transfer, and that could be online through those, also through cash apps, but it also could be your brick and mortar, so your Western Unions or places that you can physically go and transmit money. And you'll notice to the right, that has the greatest loss of money. And that's usually because wire transfer fraud really hits our elderly population, and they're very quick to wire large amounts of money to somebody that they feel is in need. Then you also have your gift reload cards, cash advance, checking, money orders, and then telephone bills. And then the last thing that the FTC does with their reports is they try to get an understanding of the age groups that are affected most by the fraud reports, and then how much money per age group is affected. So obviously our younger audience and our older audience tends to have a smaller number of reports. Now, I do want to say that doesn't necessarily mean that those that are 80 and older aren't being scammed, and I'll kind of touch upon that in a second. But then you'll notice the biggest range in our hot age group is really our 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and kind of our 50 to 59. And with the larger reports comes the larger amounts of fraud lost. And that's really because during that period of time, those are your most active online. Those are those that have a little bit more funds. Maybe they have greater salary ranges. They might have investments, retirements, and so they can see a greater loss in money in that aspect. But going back to the 80 and over group, a lot of times people see the low reports and they think that the elderly population is safe, and that's far from the truth. The truth is that only 1 in 44 financial elder abuse cases are even reported. And a lot of times that's from embarrassment, it's from an adult child or grandchild helping and not understanding that they need to make reports. if their elderly grandparent or parent is scammed. And the thing is too, is that a lot of times maybe the elderly population is scammed from their own family or a close friend of the family, and they don't want to report it because they don't want to get anybody in trouble per se. So that's also something that we see. We try to educate, we try to work with the Department of Aging on this because it is information that we like to get out, but we also understand that the reports, when people see it, they don't think it's a big need. And then just to kind of jump back from the fraud, there is the other category, which if you'll notice at the bottom right, your other category is your credit cards, your bank saving loans and credit unions, credit bureaus, lending such as mortgage, and then your television, satellite, and cable. The identity theft is kind of, the category is kind of straight out there. It's if somebody's personal information is stolen. And then the do not call category. So that's going to be your robocalls versus your live calls. It used to be kind of 50-50 when I was doing the presentations for this in the last month or so, but as it's now approaching July, we are seeing an uptick in robocalls again, which is interesting, especially for our state, because the AG's office implemented a new division or section that really is starting to cut down on robocalls. So we did notice that there were a lot of people saying, oh, I used to get so many calls, especially calls from my own area code, and I would answer because I thought it was my dentist or I thought it was a family member, and it ended up being, you know, someone, a scammer of some sort or someone trying to scam me. So it's interesting to see that the robocalls are now at close to the 70% mark and live calls are at the 30%. And then top reports were imposters, medical and prescription, reducing debt options, warranty protection plans, and then utilities. And then to wrap up the FTC report, I did look at Ohio's. Overall, in the last 7 months, when it is concerning COVID, we've seen only 3,075 reports. There has been a total fraud loss of about 1.65 million, so about 44% of the fraud reported, and then a median fraud loss of 287. So a little bit higher than the nationwide loss. But when I was looking at the ranking of where Ohio is, there are several other states that have had a greater hit and have more overall reports per their state and population. So Ohio has done well enough in protecting themselves against these types of frauds. So how our common financial scams kind of changed a little bit with the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, one of our most notorious scams that hit any age range is the imposter scam. So a victim receives a call or an email. They might say that they're in trouble or someone's trying to get a hold of you. It might seem that it's coming from maybe a government official like the FBI or the IRS. The imposter maybe tells a woman, this can be any age, to act quickly so they don't get in trouble. Or they try to convince her, you know, they're legitimate, just act fast. And so this individual tells her, you know, wire or send money or provide some personal information so you don't get in trouble. What we've seen in the last 7 months is this has been tied with someone claiming to be from the IRS when there was stimulus payment check time, or the office of the president stating they need information to process his or her stimulus check. We also have heard of random calls from customer service representatives from, you know, somebody's financial institution. So for example, a woman receives a call from Joe, very general, basically saying, I'm, you know, customer service calling from your bank, just want to make sure everything's good, your personal information is up to date, and everything's safe. And if she or he on the phone is not really paying attention, they might accidentally give out personal information they normally wouldn't give out. So you really want to be on top of, you know, the types of calls that you get, especially if you're not making initial contacts, you know, your bank, or to maybe if you're looking for refinance option for mortgages or stuff for items like that. And then the other one is a little bit geared toward the elderly population, and it really has to do with providing updated personal information to make sure that their Medicare information is up to date. Because COVID was hitting the elderly at a greater rate than other age groups, a lot of elderly patients were nervous and thinking, do I have to be prepared if I have to be rushed to the hospital? So scammers were getting on top of it, and they were pretending to be, from Medicare or Social Security and asking for that type of information. The grandparent scam is also a very common scam that we see. Obviously, it hits our older population. So a victim receives a call from a young adult pretending to be a grandchild who's in trouble. Maybe they're in jail in another city. A lot of times it's spring break related. The imposter tells grandma, don't tell my parents. I don't want them to know. I don't want them to worry. So he tells, grandma, just help me out, send me some money. Well, with COVID, since nobody was really traveling because of the stay-at-home bans and from no travel quarantine issues, in this situation, it could be an elderly gentleman receives a call from a young adult pretending to be a grandchild. But in this situation, they are just in need of money because they lost their job due to COVID and they can't pay their rent or they can't pay their bills. So they tell their grandparent, don't tell my parents because I don't want them to worry. Same old, same old. And then they're just urgent on saying, grandpa, send me money immediately. A lot of times it's an overseas request and they want a wire transfer. So that's how we've kind of seen the grandparent scam transform a little bit. And then the next one is a sweetheart scam. This obviously hits your age group of those that are 50 and older. A lot of times it happens online, especially with older dating websites, Craigslist, anytime, anywhere where our 50 and older group can reach out to other folks, maybe because they're lonely and they don't really socialize as often as they should. And con artists convince victims that they're in love. They really kind of coax them over a period of time, and then that's how they get them to kind of send them money or drain their retirement savings. In the COVID world, what we see is a woman starts to talk to a new love interest back at the very beginning when this all kind of hit the US, and she's talking to him or her back and forth, and all of a sudden she finally receives a stimulus payment, and then suddenly this man that she's been talking to is in need of money. So she offers to send him, her stimulus payment check or funds from it. So again, another way that people were targeting folks was knowing when someone was going to get a large sum of money and kind of act on that. And then lastly, some of the scams that we've seen over the course of the 7 months, and something that pops up every now and then depending on the market, is refinance and mortgage scams. When the mortgage world is hot and the interest rates are low, that means refinancing is an option for a lot of Americans, and that's when scammers can kind of fall in the cracks and get a hold of some folks' personal information, or they can get them to send them money and information when they relatively wouldn't. And the scammers usually use email, phone calls, flyers, direct mailers to lure you in. And a lot of times they're asking for personal information, social security info. With COVID, it really just, again, it's monopolizing off of a situation where low interest rates were happening. People were getting in panic mode. There was a lot of people contacting banks, a lot of long wait periods on customer service lines. So people were looking for other avenues to reach out to get help with refinancing. And so they might have fallen victim to a scammer, and that scammer had no legitimacy working in that type of industry. They were just looking for some information, and then identity theft happens. So how has DFI been on top of scams and concerns, especially for folks in Ohio? We continuously evaluate FTC complaint reports and other sources. We find common trends among calls we receive through our customer hotline. Anytime we see common trends, whether it's common complaints dealing with banks or common complaints dealing with short-term loans, auto lenders, anything like that. We always kind of get on top of it and start to make outreach initiatives happen. We also connect with other state financial agencies for trending scams that could be coming our way. We're always in conversation with Pennsylvania, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Indiana, because a lot of times when there are companies that operate in those states, they often operate in ours. So we just always want to be on top of any scams that can kind of happen state to state. And then we have been always checking in with our financial institutions just to ask if they've had increase in activity, if they've had any issues with forbearance applications or federal loan program applications, if they've seen people come in wanting to take out large sums of money. Any red flags we like to be on top of and kind of see what could be happening in that part of the state. The same thing with credit unions. The credit unions were really good at shutting down branches, specifically access to their lobbies when everything was happening so that they could leverage people to use the ATM and phone apps. But it's over the course of the last couple months, those institutions have been gradually opening up again, and they've just been still very cautious in how they approach that. To highlight some things that have touched upon a lot of folks in the last few months, the stimulus payment scams that we've seen. A lot of folks should have received their stimulus payment at this point. If you haven't, a lot of times people are thinking maybe it was something I did wrong in my tax return, maybe I didn't file correctly, maybe they didn't know that they were supposed to be receiving a debit card instead of a check or a direct deposit. But a lot of times, if you haven't received something, we always direct people to the identitytheft.gov website because it could have landed into the hands of an identity thefter. So we always just tell folks, go to identitytheft.gov and then click Get Started, and then you'll be able to walk through the steps. You'll be able to walk through the steps to get that handled. And then some other things that we've seen, did a nursing home or assisted living facility take yours or your family member's stimulus check? This is something that we see in the elderly population, so I just like to highlight it. If you know of anyone that you work with closely that have that do outreach events for the elderly population, it is against the law for a nursing or assisted living facility to take someone's stimulus check. So you just want to be on top of that and work with that family on that issue. And then to kind of wrap up, I did want to touch upon some online shopping scams and some tips to lead with. Most of the complaints involving online shopping scams are really about items not arriving on time or not at all. And then some items, when they do arrive, they might be different than advertised. Something that we've seen over the course of the years, but something that's even more relevant right now. And then additional scams that have been making their rounds in the last few months have been fake websites. So these sites look like they're legitimate e-commerce websites, credible looking logos, pictures, payment options, and everything. But they're not. They're fake websites that just get your personal information or your credit card information. They're just not secure. So there are many scammers on the internet that consumers and merchants need to be aware of, especially when it comes to the e-commerce fraud world. And if anybody feels like they've been a victim, we always immediately say to file a police report, get in touch with your credit card company, follow the steps with identitytheft.gov. Some steps or some tips to walk away with. A lot of times I like to remind folks, make sure when you are shopping online that you're looking at a website that is secure. So at the top of your browser, the address bar, it should show that HTTPS, the S stands for secure. There also should be a padlock symbol there as well. That's just making sure that when you enter your information, when you're shopping on that website, that it's as secure as possible. Another thing to be cautious of, something that we see rotate year after year, is your phishing emails. Obviously, don't click on anything. Don't click on anything that you wouldn't normally deal with over the phone. Avoid unsecured Wi-Fi. A problem that we've seen with a lot of folks, because their home budgets have taken a hit. Some people have been using public Wi-Fi or public internet, like in your coffee shops, your airports, or your restaurants, because they needed to maybe cancel their services. And you just want to be cautious on when you're using those public. So you just need to make sure that when you're using those public platforms, that you are not putting in personal information, and that if you can, use your own phone's data network for sensitive transactions. And then always be on top of your credit card statements. Make sure that you're checking to make sure that there's no activity that is not from you, and just really paying attention to that, because scammers start really small by pulling out $10, $20, and then before you know it, it can increase, and before you even realize it. And then just a quick reminder before I wrap up, a lot of folks have been financially impacted by the coronavirus. There are those that have been more impacted than others, but in general, we've been feeling a lot of anxiety around our financial health. So the 3 national credit reporting agencies, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, are giving people, sorry about that. Are giving people weekly access to monitor their credit report for free. So before you've been able to go to annualcreditreport.com and get one free yearly report. Now you can get a free weekly report. And this will be happening for the next year, so up until about April of 2021. So if you know anybody that regularly banks with a state chartered bank or credit union, or if you have anybody that has complaints to make about money transmitters or consumer finance entities, they can call our Division of Financial Institutions, Office of Consumer Affairs. The number is listed there. If anything, if we can't help you with your complaint, we always refer it to the agency that we know that can. A lot of times that might be the CFPB, the OCC, or even the Attorney General's office. But we also do take complaints. So if you have any fraud complaints that you'd like to make, we take those as well. And then again, get it to the correct agency to actually file the complaint for you. And that's about it for today.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. So again, if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to type those into the question box now. But as of right now, it doesn't look like we have any. I wanted to thank Dan and Victoria again for that great information and for being able to be available to present it all for everyone today. And as I mentioned, we did record this webinar, so we will put it on our trustlocal.org website. So again, I wanted to say thank you. I don't know if anybody has any last thoughts, but it doesn't look like we have any questions now. So if I don't see one pop up in the next minute or so, I'm just going to say thank you and have a great day and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Sorry for my guest speaker.
It happens to us all. I've been there before.
All right.
Thank you so much, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.